Hello, my name is Christine, and I'm going to be presenting the work which we're doing here at Ebony Forest on mainland Mauritius. And it's work which has been done by myself, the conservation manager, Nicholas Zuel, and two students from Stanford University and University of Reunion. And we are looking at how Aldabra giant tortoises can be used to restore missing ecosystem functions and at the same time help us manage our forest restoration activities. So most work which has been done with the use of Aldabra giant tortoises as ecological replacements for the two species of Mauritian giant tortoise have been done on offshore islands such as Elizabeth and Round Island, but the potential for their use on mainland Mauritius is huge. Okay, so we have been operating since 2005, and we operate at 4 conservation sites across Mauritius. So we have Ebony Forest in the southwest of the island, then we have Montalong in the north, and Vallée de l'Est and Providence on the east of Mauritius. And they're all different habitat types, but they all have similar challenges, which I'm going to discuss. And we also have similar approaches to our habitat management. So there is a real need for protection of habitat and habitat restoration in Mauritius. And this is because since human colonization, forest cover has significantly decreased to less than 2% of native forest remaining. So it's at a critical stage. And one of the greatest threats that is facing our native flora is invasive alien plants, such as Chinese guava, Ravenal, Gambrosa, and Yan surf. And many of these species form mono cultures and taking over habitat and outcompeting the slower growing native vegetation. So a classic approach, which is adopted by us at Ebony Forest and many other land managers in Mauritius and elsewhere, is we go and do what we call initial weeding, where we take out the guava, the Tacoma, the hardwood trees that are competing with the natives. Now, if there's no need to plant, which is always an ideal situation, is that we simply can jump straight forward to maintenance weeding. But in many situations, forests have been so invaded, so we need to plant and restore the native community. And with this process, we of course have to propagate plants in advance. Now, the challenge that we face is where we go from removing the exotic woody plants is that we start to change the abiotic conditions. So we go from areas which have low light to suddenly habitats where there's high light intensity. And of course, this brings forward new challenges, which are fast-growing exotic herbaceous weeds, such as bidens, meconium, and azyspasia. So we have a vast array of different exotic herbaceous weeds, and it depends on the sites, but these are just common species that occur. And of course, if we don't manage these, then the slow-growing natives are just swamped and they can't compete. And so we go back to stage 1 if we can't control these. So we have a team that will do regular maintenance weeding in order to remove these fast-growing weeds. And as the vegetation, native vegetation goes up and light levels decrease, then we can reduce our amount of maintenance weeding. Another challenge which is occurring in many mainland forests is that many of the species are seed dispersal limited. And these are often large fleshy fruited species such as ebonies, Phyliphiums, Calophyllums, Pandanus, Mimosops species. And one of the reasons for this is because of over 50% of the vertebrate species on mainland Mauritius have been driven extinct. So we've gone from a very diverse frugivore assemblage to one which is incredibly limited. So from species such as the 2 species of giant tortoise, which were over 100 kilos, to now suddenly having a very small seed dispersal. Of course, these birds, such as the merle, the echo parakeet, the pink pigeon, and the only mammal, the Mauritian fruit bat, are too small to be able to consume and disperse these seeds effectively. So what happens is a lot of the fruit, when they fall from the tree, they fall on the ground and they just rot very close to the mother tree. There's limited amount of abiotic dispersal. And while there's been lots of introductions into Mauritius, unfortunately, many of the mammalian species introduced, they're not seed dispersers. They will consume and can consume large amounts of fruit, but they are in general seed predators. So they destroy the seeds in the process of eating them. So of course, the conventional management approach to dealing with, of course, natural regeneration or seed dispersal limitation is that human intervention is needed to either broadcast seeds in habitats, or one of what we predominantly do is we will propagate plants in our nursery and then subsequently plant these out. Now, whether it be invasive plant management or addressing limited seed dispersal, all of this requires financial input, reliable manpower, and maintaining this, because it's a long-term approach in terms of habitat restoration. And if we cannot maintain this, then this is it sets up other challenges. And of course, this all brings a headache. So we, of course, think that one of the solutions and the long-term solutions is the use of Aldabra giant tortoises in habitat management. And of course, not just one Aldabra giant tortoise, but a whole host of Aldabra giant tortoises. Now, the thinking of this is that we know from studies on Elizabeth and Round Island, this is where I did much of my PhD research, is that Aldabra giant tortoises preferentially consume faster growing exotic vegetation. Faster growing vegetation doesn't invest in anti-herbivorous traits, it's juicier, it's tastier, and so they preferentially eat this. And in their process of repeatedly grazing areas, they create these wonderful grazing lawns of closely cropped vegetation. And at the same time, tortoises are attracted to many of the large fleshy fruited species that we have in the native flora, and they are incredibly effective seed dispersers. That is because they consume large quantities of fruit. They have a very benign gut system, and at the same time, afterwards, they deposit these seeds in a lovely, moist, nutrient package. And often these are deposited in their grazing lawns where there's very little competition with fast-growing exotics. And as a result of them not really, they not eat many of these endemic hardwood species because they have heterophilous traits. So, these seedlings can germinate and grow in these areas. And this is, of course, makes tortoises very good at dispersing the seeds and creating an environment which will facilitate and hopefully accelerate forest restoration. So the idea is if we can use Aldabra giant tortoises as ecological replacements also for the species, we can increase the number of seed dispersals, at the same time address our challenge of controlling a lot of the exotic vegetation. Now, we're of course aware that giant tortoises want to naturally engineer and as reptiles create different environments. So it's all about managing their distribution and their population. So just brief on what we've done at Ebony Forest. So in 2019, we bought 4 sub-adult Aldabra giant tortoises. They were donated by Lavani Nature Park. And then just after COVID, we were fortunate to have Nusa, who is a Mauritian student but doing her BSc at the University of Stanford. And she looked at the tortoises' diet and their movement. One of the challenges that we had with the tortoises is we wanted to release them previously, but as a mainland site, we don't have any necessarily natural borders. So there was the concern of how can we make sure they remain on site or are not stolen. So it took us time to find the right transmitters, and these were fortunately funded by the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund. and they are solar charged mobile transmitters which collect real-time location data of the tortoises. And so we spent quite a long time tinkering with the company to fine-tune these transmitters. And then between April and June of this year, we had Victor from the University of Reunion, who was doing his master's, and he verified the reliability of the trackers and also recorded information about the tortoise movement and their diet, reinforcing work which Nusa had done. And again, in July, we brought 10 more individuals with the objective of releasing these tortoises from the enclosure. So in brief, some of the findings what both Nusa and Victor found is, like many other places, the Aldabra giant tortoises eat a wide variety of vegetation, preferentially consuming exotics. Through their eating, they are creating grazing lawns, they're reducing above ground biomass in areas in which they predominate. They, of course, are avoiding heterophilous plants. They do eat native plants, and that's not, for me, a worry. Native tortoises, native Mauritian tortoises would also have only eaten native plants. And of course, these are the native plants which don't exhibit heterophilous or anti-herbivorous traits. And we've also found that they've been eating guava fruits. So just as an idea, they preferentially consume the most common fast-growing species that we have. But what was also interesting is we found that they eat the seedlings of a tree species, and this is quite frequently seen. Observe these. So Victor also found that the trackers were reliable and they were precise, and using the trackers, he created heat maps and noted that the tortoises, of course, as you would expect, are predominating in open respiration sites. They regularly move up and down the hills. They're creating natural wallows. One of the key important factors is the tortoises' well-being. So we monitor their tortoise. We take morphometrics monthly. We found that the tortoise is healthy. They're able to find water as expected. We also had to test before we released the tortoises whether they would be safe within our predator control grid, as we have these yellow traps and tortoises, and their love for yellow was a concern in case they would injure themselves. And so it's just for us really adapting for the tortoises, giving way for them when they're on the road, the track roads that we have, and also monitoring the human visitor interactions that are the visitor tortoise interactions that are occurring. So our next step is going to be releasing 6 more tortoises, and then we can set up exclosure studies and monitor their vegetation impacts. We also want to look further at the effectiveness of dispersal. So a lot of this work will be done working with universities and students. We are planning in 2024 to release, introduce 10 individuals to our upland site, Valley Less. And of course, we'll be continuing to monitor how we can use the Aldabra giant tortoises as a restoration tool to control the invasive alien plants and at the same time encourage seed dispersal. So a lot of this work is thanks down to support from the donation of tortoises from Labani Nature Park, the directors of Ebony Forest, Owen and Marianne Griffiths, and funding from the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund. And it's thanks to work by Nusa and Victor, and also all of the staff and volunteers at Ebony Forest. And of course, I'd like to thank IOTA for being here today.